ụmụ Igbo ka ekonomi malụ nọ na bụ onye na eluzo ofu ya nke ọbalụ o nwere afa nche kpọla kịta mkpọ afọ ọ ga-ada ụda na ntị mana o nwere ife ị ga-echeta ọnwụ gburu ụmụ Igbo gee ntị. O nwere onye a na-akpọ ụmụnnakwe Aguiyi Ironsi chọọ ịkpọlu ya n'isi kpọọ ya JTU nya Johnson Thomas ụmụnnakwe Aguiyi Ironsi. O nwere ike mara ya nwee ike ịma ya ịma ka o si nwụ na 29 July 1966 after ka emecha nke 15 July yetego emesigo Q gbuo ndị egbulegbu ndị ugwu wee welụkwa iwe wee chighata azụ wee lụzia nkefa. Onye a na-ekwu ife a ọ nọ na nke ọyi ya nwoke na Ibadan mgbe abịa akpụlụ ya mana oge abịa ịkpụlụ ya nụ ndị amebe ekpo ya ka aga gbue nwa ya nwoke nọ ya. Nwa ya nwoke a gbara ife dịka 13 nya 13 years ma kpọọ ya 12 years according to wee bụ na ya bụ onye kịta pụta na-ekwu okwu okwukwere ife menụ na ife nni ya gwara ya ife nni ya gwara ya nya kaba arụ funomelụ na Naijiria ọ nọ ife a ka ọ na-emekwanụ sinsini mana o nwekwa ka o si kwuba okwu kwuo si na ọ bụrụ na enye ya oyi welụ nye ụmụ ife oyi wel a n'obi ga-adịkwa ya mma. O nwere ife ndị ọzọ kwugasị n'okwu a bụ nwa Aguiyi Ironsi ka anyị na-afụrụ Aguiyi Ironsi anyị fụ nwa ya anyị ga-amụ ya maka anyị fụ nna ya afụgo ndị mbụ. Achọrọ m ka anyị gee ntị ka anyị n'ife ọchị ịgwa anyị ọ bụrụ na anyị ga-esizi ya ịgbadakwa na comment section anyị amala ife ikwu mana ị ga-atụsakwa ozi atụsa. Ọ bụrụ na ị subscribe at our YouTube channel ị subscribe at Onowu Igbo TV 1 ka ife niile a na-eme wee na-aga n'anya n'elu Igbo eze ụmụ iyo.
General Aguiyi Ironsi'S son, Tom, was just 12 years old at the time, and he was with his father when they led him away, never to be seen alive again. Tom went on to represent Nigeria as its ambassador in several postings abroad and would later become, in 2007, President Obasanjo's Minister of Defense. I'm delighted to say that Ambassador Tom Aguiyi Ironsi joins me now in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. Really honored to have you here. What do you remember of that period?
Thank you very much, Charles, for having me. As you just mentioned, I was 12 years old during that period. But if I look back at the events of 29th July, actually I'd come in from the summer holidays.
You were in boarding school in England, of course.
Coming from summer holidays. The day itself, I was with my father in his drawing room in the guest house, and he jokingly told me that there are soldiers surrounding us downstairs.
And that was the guest house in Ibadan.
That's right.
In the military governor of the western region, Faji, that was his house.
That was right, his house. So he told me that he doesn't know whether they're friendly or not, in a joking manner. And then later proceeded to give me some instructions as to what to do when I got back to Lagos. And then there was a knock at the door, and he told me to stand behind the door because he didn't want anybody to come inside. And from the door, I could hear voices and people saying there's going to be no killing here. And that was the end. So yes, 29 July is an important date in the history of Nigeria, but also January 15th. I'm not here today to open wounds. So first of all, I must say that all those that lost their lives in January and July 1966, may their souls rest in peace.
Amen.
Why I'm here is because of what is happening in the country today.
Well, we're going to get to that, and we're going to have hopefully ample opportunity to discuss that, because your take on that, given the pivotal role that you and your family have played in the evolution of politics in this country is absolutely crucial. But I just want to go back to that date. You were 12 years old. You've shared some of your memories with us, but just, did your father have any premonition that that was going to be his last day on earth? Did he seem frightened when he was giving you those instructions?
I really don't want to go into too many details.
Right.
Because some of the people who are alive, who can speak better on such matters. But from my perspective, as I said, I was on summer holidays. I came back and he took me on a tour. We went to the north, we went to Benin before we came to Ibadan. As a student of strategic studies, politics, international relations, I've read, I've also done my research. I realized that part of his tour was consultations with the elders in the north, and he had come down to the west to consult with elders in the west. Because, as you mentioned before, there was a lot of distrust that this was an Igbo agenda. And the Northerners insisted that he should consult with them. The Saldana was killed. He brought about much bad blood. The Emir of Sokoto came down to see him, and they said, "You must consult with us." He failed to do that initially, and by the time I came on holiday, he was in the process of trying to make up for that.
So they needed reassurances.
They needed reassurances as to what programs he was going to do, what he was going to do with the soldiers that were locked up who carried out the coup.
And that was part of the anger, wasn't it? That in spite of the fact that he put down that coup, he didn't actually do anything with these soldiers who essentially murdered Nigeria's political elite.
That was it. He was too slow. Nowadays, when people are slow, they say it's a virtue. But at that time, they didn't want things to be slow. He was taking his time. There was also the case of Awolowo. Some people would tell you that he was just about to be released by my father. But these things are, as I said, in the past. We need to look forward.
But it was really just, because the second part of this will look forward, but just to go back to that January 15th, it was the brutality of that coup that really freaked people out, wasn't it? I mean, groups of army officers forming themselves into hit squads to hunt down Nigeria's civilian and military leaders while they slept.
It's terrible. The periods of coup, not only in Nigeria, but in other African countries, were bloody. It's a sad fact. It's a very sad fact. And in fact, the Queen too, when I was presented to her at the Commonwealth Conference in Canada in the 80s, she said it's such a pity that Africa has lost so many good people.
Looking back at that period and what could be considered the heavy reaction of the army to what by today's standards would be mild corruption, let me put it that way. I mean, how does it make you feel today when you see people who, for want of a better term, can be called criminal politicians getting away with corruption?
The issue of corruption is a difficult one. It's cultural in the sense that both Muslims and Christians know that corruption is not good. Why does it come about? There's psychological, societal
Well,
pressures.
it's kleptomania, isn't it? keep as much of it in your pocket as possible.
I think it's more than that.
The sense that, there is a certain unpredictability to the future of Nigeria's economy. So stuff your pocket and your guts as much as you can.
No, I think it's more than that. There's plain greed.
Well, that's what I mean. That's exactly it. That's greed.
Greed.
Yes, I agree. And of course, after 1966, the army took over and would dominate Nigerian politics really up till 1999. I mean, in spite of this small bursts of sort of civilian rule. And many of those young military officers from 1966 are now wealthy grandfathers, still, wielding enormous influence in Nigerian politics, including, of course, the current president and retired General Muhammadu Buhari, who was one of the officers who took part in that 1966 counter-coup when your father died on July 29th.
Yes, July 29th, I lost a caring father who was not able to play with his grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and also missed the opportunity of getting an oil block. Sorry, I apologize for that.
I like it. But then you got the oil block, so everything's fine.
No, I wish President Obasanjo would give me an oil block. But if you know him, you know it's not possible. So, in that respect, on a very serious note, yes, these officers have come up today, but in the Nigeria of today, the Nigeria of the 60s, what was stressed was that we should respect our differences. Nigeria is a complex society. And if we don't respect our differences, things go awry. So, on the anniversary of July 29th, I make a plea for us to respect our differences. Also, this issue of vengeance, reprisal attacks, we have to see an end to that.
Right. I'm going to get to talk about these, your sense of the security situation in Nigeria in the second half of this chat, because you were, of course, Minister of Defense in 2007. But I just want to talk a little bit more about those young officers of those days, the ones who lived and who were on the victorious side, if I might put it that way. They've become sort of military kingmakers because General Obasanjo, who made you his Minister of Defense, one of those retired kingmakers who himself was a former military head of state and later civilian president, was one major factor in President Goodluck Jonathan's election defeat in 2015, when he withdrew his support for Jonathan and instead helped General Buhari to power.
Yes, if you want to talk about the Nigerian military, if we go back to the 60s, we find a cohesive group, people who were their brother's keepers.
Right.
My father, his best friend was General Adebayo, a Yoruba man. Uncle Jack, as I call him, General Gowon, was a regular visitor to the family. Now, over the years, we saw a situation where coups developed. You find it very difficult for officers to go to the mess nowadays to even interact with one another. So things have changed in the military.
Right. Of course, we were talking earlier about President Buhari and the military officers who were part of the coup and counter-coup in 1966, who are now essentially kingmakers in Nigeria. Of course, as a young officer, President Mr. Buhari was among the northern officers who staged the counter-coup that led to your father's sad and rather brutal assassination. Do you hold Mr. Buhari at least partly responsible for your father's death?
Charles, before answering that, just for clarification, I was Nigeria's ambassador to Togo. That's my only ambassadorial posting.
Well, you worked with the
But
foreign service.
I was the foreign service for 30 years, of course.
Right.
Went to numerous countries. President Buhari Magaskia is a man of good intentions. He certainly has helped me personally in the past.
Right.
When my Volvo knocked engine. Of course, he didn't give me any money, but he recommended me for
Well, he doesn't
job.
have a reputation for giving people money.
And I'm not from Daura. It still helped me. In those days, going back to when he was a young officer,
Right.
I'm sure that we all look back at certain things that we did and said in our earlier days, which we probably regret. In hindsight, my father told me one thing that was embedded in me before he was led away. He said, don't take vengeance. As a 13-year-old boy, 12 years old, I didn't understand why he was telling me don't take vengeance. But it has guided my life in that God is the person that takes vengeance, is in charge. Nobody can command God.
Right.
So all these officers, whatever they did in the past, I'm sure when they are lying on their beds, whether with all the wealth they have, whether they're kingmakers, only they and God knows what they have in mind and what they're sorry for. But as far as President Buhari is concerned, I know that he's a man of good intentions, and I wish him well to go and also have a chance to play with his grandchildren and great-grandchildren.